Hello everybody. I am sitting in my car because today is Saturday, story time. Actually, it's Friday for me, but it's story time for you guys. And I have a good one. I have a choice of them. I'm not going to give you the choice. I'm just going to pick which one I want to pick. But first, I need to get something to drink. I need my tea. So, be back in just a second. See you in just a second. Hey everybody. I know what you're wondering about what I'm drinking. Just black tea actually with oat milk, and that's about it. That's it. Just black English tea and oat milk. Today's story, I had one I was thinking of, and I actually made a little video about it, but I'm not really happy with it. It's more instructional. I might put that out some other time or redo it again. But this one, I'm going to tell you a story. So when I was doing the was it the radiator? What was I doing on this? Brakes? Anyway, I was working on the front of this car, and I said I'd mention the thing about the 45, that Harley Davidson 45, and what I did to that. Oh, it was Ben's truck. Last story time. That's what it was. I was telling you guys as I was putting the fan on, and I was cutting the things too short. Yeah, I still, guess what? This radiator leaks, by the way. So, the 45. So Ben's buddy, his name's Jack, and I met him through another friend of mine who has a bunch of motorcycles. Cool guy. He called me and said, hey, this guy Jack has a servi-car. It's a 1969 Harley Davidson servi-car. It's a trike. It's black and white. It was a Honolulu Police Department, like basically a meter-made trike. It's a 45 cubic inch flatted Harley Davidson, and it's single seat, and it has this big fiberglass box that you open up, and it would have had like a light bar and sirens and stuff and extra stuff in it, and that's what it was. It's still black and white. So he bought this. Another guy and another friend of his that he met, they restored it and they rebuilt this engine, and they used lots of NOS stuff from like military surplus in this engine. So I may have told you about this. If I did, forgive me. If I didn't, enjoy the video. Enjoy this story. So my buddy calls me and says, hey, this guy Jack has a servi-car, and would you mind if he called you and talked to you about it? And because he could use your help, and there's nobody else on this island really that he wants to work on it, because the other guy that does motorcycles, that has a shop, is kind of, I don't know, he didn't want to do it for some reason. And so I said, yeah, sure. So the guy gave him his number, gave him my number, and Jack called me. I was actually at Costco. I was out in the parking lot, and he called me, and we started talking. He was super excited to talk to me about fixing his bike. And so I made the time to show up over there, and I showed up, and here's this beautiful, I think I have pictures of it. I'll put it up here if I do. It's a really pretty bike. It's just totally stock. Got a Zenith carburetor on it, and this Harley 45 that's totally been redone. And he says it doesn't start. They had it running, but it doesn't run right. And so, this guy who's like a motorcycle restorer who moved over here from New York, who was like part of like the Wheels Through Time or American classic motorcycle. He was like some big name guy who moved over here, helped him restore it. They did a fantastic job on the bike, but the engine just didn't run right. And so they just kind of threw their hands up. And I looked at it, and I tried to start it, and it didn't sound right. So I told him, I said, I'm going to get real deep into this. Are you okay with that? He's like, what do you mean? I said, well, I need to pull the side of the motor that has a bunch of has 4 gear-driven camshafts, generator, and the crank pinion gear. And I said, I need to see, I need to make sure these things are lined up. And he goes, I have a picture of us when we set the cams up that all the marks are lined up. And so he showed me a picture, side cover off, and here they are. When they built the engine fresh, all the timing marks are lined up the way they're supposed to be. And I was like, interesting. And I said, well, I still want to pull it off and look for myself. He said, okay. So I pulled I pulled the brake lever off, and I pulled the floorboard off of this side, and I pulled the exhaust off because it ran around this way. And I pulled the fin side cover off, and there's the cam gears all sitting there, and I rolled the motor around until I got it on number one, and I just lined the marks up. And all the marks lined up, sure enough. So I cranked it over, and I was watching the lifters move, and I was like, this something's weird. I watched the lobe move, and I'm like, I need to pull the head off. And since it's a side valve, so it's like a Briggs and Stratton. It's got two valves and a piston and just this finned valve cover or finned cylinder head, where the valves kind of go up. They're in the block. They're in the barrels with the it's a flathead. So I said I need to pull the head off. And he said, well, what's that going to cost me? I said, well, we're just going to pull it off. I'm sure you got gaskets, or if they're cheap, I'll get you some gaskets. So he said, okay. So I yanked the one head off right there. And I thought, I'm yanking the other head. So I yanked both heads off. So now I'm down to jugs, valves, pistons, intakes on, because it runs into the jugs, the carbs on, and I'm looking at the cam. So basically I've got like you took the valve covers off your motor and your timing cover, and I'm looking at this thing. And I'm spinning it around, and I'm watching this valve go up, and then compression stroke, and intake valve goes up and then goes down, compression stroke, piston goes down, piston comes back up, exhaust valve's opening, and start to cycle again. I go, okay, so the rear cylinder's good. Watching the front cylinders from the time mark, and I see the intake valve go open and then close, and the exhaust valve opens and closes, and then compression and exhaust, and the intake valve opens. And I was like, what? Wait a minute. Because they're two separate cams, right? The intake cam and the exhaust cam are two separate cams. So I watch it come around, and the marks go as they're supposed to. I line it back up again, and I see the piston come down. The intake valve's open. Piston comes down. Piston's going back up, and the exhaust valve opens. Well, that's supposed to be the compression stroke. The valve's supposed to be closed. And then the piston goes back down, and the exhaust closes. And then it goes back up, which should be the exhaust stroke, and then starts to go back down, and the intake opens again. And I was like, no. So I back it back around, line it back up. I'm looking at this, and they're all marked out. And I have a buddy in Sweden, John. And so John's been building a 45 Harley Davidson motorcycle, little solo, but he's using like a M90, like Eaton supercharger. One of those M90s, like off of, what would that have been on? Like a Pontiac Grand Prix or something? V6, like a 3.8 V6. He got this supercharger, Eaton M90 or 90 on it. And he's running this side draft SU, and he made his own like shifter and clutch. And it's like a foot clutch, foot shifter at the same time. It's like a B&H like racing thing, and it's weird. So he's been out there racing this thing on whatever, and I said, do you have any stock cams laying around? Do you have any camshafts? And he said, why? And I said, just send me a picture, text me a picture of a stock camshaft, and I want to see the timing mark in relation to the lobe on the exhaust. And he said, okay. I said, I think that I got a bad camshaft. In fact, I know that's what I got, even though the marks line up. And I said, I think it's roughly 80, 85 degrees out of sync, because the timing mark and the lobe should not be lined up together. The timing mark should line up, but the way the lobe should be, if you do the cylinder timing, is it should be about 85 degrees off. So sure enough, he snaps me a picture, and I was right on. It was like 83 degrees off or something. And so I told Jack that we got to get another cam. So he finds another Army surplus camshaft in a factory Harley box, comes in like wax paper with cosmoline, that factory grease, and sends it to me. So it gets here, and my buddy from Sweden sent me a cam too, just in case I didn't have one, sent me a factory cam. And so we stuck this other one in there, got it timed up, and the thing fired, but it didn't run very good. And I was like, well, I thought you guys rebuilt this. And he said, we did. And I said, well, we need to pressurize this intake manifold. And he said, what do you mean? I said, we're going to pressure test it. So I took an old Harley grip. It's an old rubber grip. And I pulled it out. I had it off a handlebar. And I use it for this. And it has a hole in the end of it. So I took my blower nozzle. And I made like a plate. So we pulled the carburetor off the intake. So that here's the intake, and here's the two bolt holes and the hole for the intake, and it splits and goes into both barrels, both cylinder heads, basically both intake ports in the barrel. And so I block it off and I put this nipple on there and I hit it with air, but I only do roughly the same pressure that would be in an intake track. So 20 inches of vacuum, I'm going to blow 20 psi in because that would be mimic the same. So I put like 20 psi in there and I make sure the pistons are closed. So I'm on the exhaust stroke because the intake valve is closed, and I'm on the compression stroke on the other cylinder. So the pistons are up, both intake valves are closed, and I pressurize the intake. And I take Windex and I spray around all and they have it's like a ferrule and a nut. It's like it looks like a plumber, like you're under your sink with a plumber's nut and a ferrule on a pipe. And it's about the size of it too. Like they call them plumber's intake, plumber fitting. And they have brass ferrules. And so I check around all the nuts and they're leaking. Everything's leaking. All the threads are leaking, the nuts are leaking. I was like, that's crazy. So we buy it takes a special wrench to get to it. So we buy new nuts and new flares and everything else. Because I was like, well, maybe this stuff was bad, or maybe you guys reused the old stuff. Put them on, tighten them down. It takes a couple weeks to get here. Pressure test it. It's leaking again, only not as bad. This time it's leaking around the same area, but it's leaking so the way the cylinders are built, these jugs have a pipe fitting that threads in. So the jugs are threaded, and then there's a nipple that sticks out, and it's threaded in. So it threads into the cylinder, it threads into the jug, and then there's like a rivet that has a hole in the jug, there's a hole in the nipple, and a rivet comes through this side and goes through the hole and holds it so it can't back itself off. So I find that this thing is leaking around the threads where the nipple goes into the jug, not where the nipple and the plumber intake go together on it, but where it actually goes into the jug, which is impossible. There's no way the military would have allowed Harleys to be sent like this factory. But sure enough, these original Harley jugs that came out of Cosmoline from like a crate that had been Army surplus, they were bad. Then that came with nipples in them. They were assembled wrong. So I found a Permatex. I'll put a picture of the bottle of it up. But I found a Permatex thread sealer that is ultra high temp. I think it's like up to like almost 2,000 degrees or something. I'll find it and I'll put it up here. And so I unthreaded them, and I threaded and they used a rivet. Instead of using a rivet in this hole, I tapped the hole for an actual set screw. So I could Loctite it and thread lock it too. So I pipe doped the nipples, threaded them in there, locked this in there, and let it sit, let it cure. I think it needed a cure for like 72 hours. So that thing cured up. Both jugs are cured with good nipples. And then threw the intake on and plumbed it up and pressure tested it, no leaks. So put the carb on that I rebuilt, set this thing, and it's got electric start. And I'm not joking. With fuel, dead cold, with the choke on halfway, no pumps of the accelerator, nothing, half of a turn, and that thing is running. Touch the button and it makes like a hurt, and it's gone. It runs and idles perfectly. It's the best running Harley I think I've ever heard. It still runs that good to this day. It's an amazing little bike. It just runs it's the most reliable thing I've ever heard. Touch it, go. The transmission has issues though, because the electric start top case has a crack and it doesn't always start, so you can kick it, but it's super easy to kick because I think it's like 7-to-1 compression. You just give it like a squirt and one kick and one easy kick and it's running. You can almost do it with your arm. It's so easy, but yeah, he rides that thing around 3-speed. It's a 3-speed shift on the tank with a foot clutch, and it rides really good, but it's not very fast. Third gear might do 45, and I don't know that I want to ride this trike around with bias ply tires and old rims from the 60s at 45 miles an hour. But anyway, that just goes to show you. So my point of the story is, don't give up on what you're working on, and if you think that something is a certain way, go ahead and go down that rabbit hole until you run to the end of it and prove to yourself that that is or is not the issue. And if it is the issue, great. If it's not the issue, you know that's not a variable anymore, move to the next variable in the equation and do the same thing. try and solve for X. But anyway, I hope you guys have a good weekend. I'll see you later.